All right. Ooh, powerful. How's it sound? Is that okay? Volume wise? Okay. All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Yes, a cold night. This reminds me of growing up in Minnesota. I must say, this is kind of like a typical winter day. Rochester, they tell me it's because of, excuse me, Lake Ontario. That huge body of water holds so much heat. It moderates, cools us in the summertime and tends to warm us up a little bit in the wintertime, or at least stop the extreme cold. Minnesota didn't have that. It's in the middle of the continent. I don't know how anyone survived there before, but nonetheless. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. And also you maybe heard me say before, we years ago we had this really like primitive video from Gar Rinpoche's return to his monastery after being in the prison camp. And it was like the first empowerment done there. And I think it was Chakrasamvara, I'm not sure. But it was so amazing because the lighting was so poor in this, but it was like winter time. And you saw all these Tibetans just totally bundled up because, no heat, no central heat. I was just so impressed, talk about that level of commitment and devotion. But of course, it's more than that. When we say commitment and devotion, it always sounds to our ears kind of conceptual, like you have someone who's really committed to the team. Or we tend to hear it in an ideological way, which is a mistake. You think of some sort of political fanatic or something, or for that matter, religious fanatic too. Um, But to see those simple Tibetans crowded there, to see Rinpoche's return, and then this profound thing, which, most of them have really no idea, and they're not trained in Dharma, uh, what the teachings might be of a Chakrasamvara or whatever. And yet that simple devotion, opens their mind. It's said that I think it's Jigten Sumgön who said that the Lama is like a mountain of ice, and it's the warmth of the devotion of the student that melts the ice, and then it melts and flows as blessings to us. So it's really our own mind that's blessing us, but just because of the way that we're wired, we have to do these practices. It seems like a contradiction of contradictions, but Garamche has said so many times that the only point of Guru Yoga, the outer Lama, is to recognize your inner Lama. Um, and I think it's a wonderful thing to understand. This is the greatness of the Dharma, that we're always talking about upaya, method, practice. It's like it's easy to say, well, we shouldn't need to do that, but there are no shoulds and oughts. These are all just conceptual objections, or whatever, on a conceptual level, but it's not conceptual. You know, it's like saying that since we're all born, that we should be able to understand childbirth by just like reading a book about it or talking about it. But of course, it's just not that way. You have to experience, whether it's a man or woman, but either way. Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Um, so the Dharma is profound, and the Dharma is realization. So therefore, it's experience. But of course, there are some things that are beyond what might be called experience too. The recognition of the nature of our mind, and so all of this, you think of the work that's been done and the effort over 2,600 years. I mean, it's staggering, but it all has purpose. I mean, this is what's so remarkable. You get towards older, like someone like me, and you start thinking about all the times involved with the Dharma. And some of the ones that stand out, are really very, very kind of ordinary. I remember leading a mantra session in Moscow in the Vajrakalaya retreat. And there's just something about all those people there and just doing that. You have a certain that experience is there. And so it adds to you. It doesn't go away, so to speak. We get so sort of goal oriented and judgmental of ourselves and looking for some sort of um, you know benefit or some sort of reward. Like, it's like giving your cat a treat, or maybe better, a dog, because a cat doesn't give a damn what you're not really training the cat. The cat's training you, but dogs, sit down, here's a treat. We kind of approach our spiritual practice like that. Um, but it's so much more profound than that. And what's wonderful about that is that you don't have to make it perfect. You just have to practice with all of our doubts, with all of our insincerities, with all of our ups and downs, with everything, our enthusiasms, our boredom, everything. That all is practice and experience. They say in the Sutra Pure Land teachings uh, that one is reciting Amitabha's name for your whole life, and that's what they do again and again and again and again. It's kind of like mantra, again and again and again and again and again. But it says that at death, all of that experience and maybe experiencing nothing, but at our death, that's all like accordioned or telescoped into a moment, because it's all there. And it's like, again, you're talking to someone who, oh, I don't know. Well, lately with these airplane crashes, I heard a pilot being interviewed on a radio station, and I was so impressed at the experience. I mean, how many hours of flying around, things going wrong, what goes wrong, and the knowledge of what can go wrong. And I mean, I was just so impressed at the experience that this man had, and we just take it for granted. But it's like that in anything. I see the guy that comes to my apartment and cleans the carpet. I mean, I was just impressed at what they knew, different problems, all of this stuff. And so there's a confidence that comes from that. So too us with the Dharma. We're practicing. The sadhanas are always seeming like you're always aware of how much you don't know. And if you're like me, especially in the longer ones, like Yamataka is happening right now in Arizona, I never knew what was going on, ringing bells, throwing rice around. I mean, and what part are we in there? And you're doing these prayers, but what is the purpose? What's the flow of it? Eventually you learn. It's kind of like a symphony. But as a young kid, you go in and it's just this overwhelming wall of sound. And that's fine. That's fine. We learn why, so we can refine our practice, make things better, more effective, but also so we can both be an example and communicate with others. The mind-boggling thing about the Dharma to me is the fact that any of it can be communicated. When you see sentient beings, and it's just, I mean, we all have these kinds of experiences. You have something that you want to say to somebody, and you're saying all the right words, and yet your words somehow triggers something in them, and their mind goes off in just a completely unrelated or not on point way. This is how we are as human beings. We're in a limited situation, no matter how refined conceptually. It can be of tremendous benefit and is important, but it's not enough. There has to be that motivation. There has to be that recognition of one's own suffering first. And that's very hard because people don't want to look and say, oh my God, I'm suffering. Rather, it's like, oh, it'll go away. And the idea that all of this world of appearances to us is kind of imperfect. We're looking around for answers and refuges all the time. That's what we do. But we haven't even labeled it. So the ordinary person doesn't know it. Or else they're living in some sort of, momentary pause. And so, things seem fine. But then, my goodness, someone gets a dread disease and they said, They think for the first time they're going to die. They've been in denial of all that. So we're living in a very kind of fractious existence, but we tend to find temporary solutions and then stop thinking about it. I've been trying to find it for a while, but it's in one of the introductions to one of Edmund Kanzi's books, where he had an experience that was, um, very significant and important to him. He was trying to do some meditation and just, had some instruction. I don't think he had a teacher. He just had some instruction from this deep investigation of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras that he had done. Uh, but he woke up in the middle of the night, and in that moment, forgot completely who he was, and he didn't have any kind of context. But this is a totally worldly experience. This is not a realization experience, but he suddenly saw just kind of his naked situation as a human being without the usual distractions and supports. And it was totally horrifying. He felt this absolute kind of aloneness in the universe and realized that that's actually our situation, our unenlightened situation. It's not actually true, but it's as things appear to us. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. But that kind of thing, shatters your complacency. And you can be doing everything in your life like you normally do, but you're no longer fooled 100%. And so that's how the Buddha started with, the first noble truth of suffering, a dukkha. I mean, it's really remarkable because he takes you right there. And even if we're just understanding it conceptually, it cuts through. It cuts through everything, especially in our era with social media and all the social media and other electronic medias and everything, and all the newspapers and everything. I mean, we have so many means of communication, and the level of noise and the level of truly ignorance. And I don't mean stupidity, because that's a false thing too. You can be extremely intelligent and yet be ignorant, not seeing how things really are. In fact, your thinking mind can take you off in like huge distractions. Really remarkable. Recently, there's this kind of this small little cult running around. These guys that murdered a border agent in Vermont. I don't know if you've heard of this. Young, kind of brilliant guys. They all take names with Z's, starting with Z for some reason. They're like involved in like 4 different murders now. One in Maryland, one in Vallejo, California. At one point, they had these extreme kind of intellectual ideas. They should be living without jobs and all these things. Somehow they got a hold of some sort of a boat. And they went up to Alaska and were living in this boat, but then it didn't work anymore. So they came back down to California. Anyway, there's these tragic stories. But what struck me was how intelligent they were. They're overthinking, you might say. So something that's so valuable for us and so fortunate. I mean, there are just all sorts of people. I myself was one of them who were, motivated. You want to have just some sort of happiness in your life, and to you without any false pride, thinking that you wanted to do something meaningful in your life too. Hadn't gotten to the point of thinking about bodhicitta, something as vast as that. But still, there are so many sincere people. And yet we kind of sort of forget all the conventional teachings of the Dharma because it sounds religious. It sounds like, oh, this is just like maybe I have to comport to somebody else's kind of belief system. What does this mean? This seems to separate from other people, all these ideas that we have. And yet it is those communications that are so necessary, because we're not looking at things from an enlightened view. It has to start with this renunciation. The word for renunciation, I'm told in Tibetan, the metaphor of it is emerging from the swamp, emerging. And so there's a humility there because, man, I just got out of the swamp, or I'm in the process of getting out of it. It's not like I'm above it all, looking down and knowing what I'm doing. So there's an openness. But this is no different than the openness of, if you want to be a piano player, if you want to be a musician, if you want to be a tennis player, if you want to be whatever your skill might be, you have to have the openness to be willing to learn. You can't come in and be telling someone. I was once at a dinner. We had a lama here. I don't know who it was, and gave a talk. And those were in the days when, it was around Telechakra and the movies. Brad Pitt and Martin Scorsese, the movies, the wonderful movies. So there was a lot of public interest. And so we had a lot of people at this event and somehow ended up in an Indian restaurant afterwards. There was a man in town who I think was a bodhisattva. His wife was interested in Buddhism, and she was sort of coming around from time to time, and certainly was interested in any talks that the lamas gave. And he was not. He was Jewish, actually a brilliant man, but in a very quiet way. And I happened to have some interactions with him, which I just found really moving, not talking about any kind of spiritual topics, not talking about any politics, not talking about anything. It was just kind of the energy that he had. And I had this natural way of interacting with him because his wife was involved in some of these activities. So there was, a natural kind of interaction. And he had survived the Holocaust. And I knew this. And at some point in this dinner, somebody, not him, just brought up the idea of the Holocaust, just brought it up. And I don't know if it was probably in relation to something that the Lama had said or something, but just, the suffering of human beings and the cruelty and how people can go completely off the rails. And they can do that all together, locking arms and, marching happily off to hell. And at the table, there was a young guy who, talk about inappropriate, started talking about how much greater his suffering was because, I don't know, something had happened to his relatives 400 years ago or something. And to me, it was such a moment because there wasn't really anything wrong with all of this. But in comparison, here's a man who had gone through so much, and I felt really had some wisdom. But again, not in a showy way, not wearing a badge. This person that was over talking like this didn't even know. And so this is what's so amazing to me because our true nature is so powerful in and of itself, and we will know how to act without thinking about it. So the thing is to realize our true nature. And the conventional teachings are what has worked for all these times. You see the Tibetans do what they do. I remember the first time in Bodh Gaya, we had no contact with Tibetan Buddhism. I didn't know a thing about it, but there we were at the place where the Buddha came to his enlightenment. And I didn't know what the practice was, but now I do. There were all sorts of monks, Tibetan monks, doing the mandala practice, taking these, making these, having a mandala plate, and then taking a handful of grain and making, different numbers of piles symbolizing different things, the four continents, and then other beings. There are 37 that you can do if you want to do it in a detailed way. Usually they do it less, but then wiping that off and starting again. I had no idea what they were doing. It didn't seem like meditation to me to have this metal plate in your hand and be grabbing, yellow saffron dyed grains of rice. And then others were doing the long prostrations, all sorts of them, towards the spot where the Buddha came to his enlightenment. I had no idea. And I could believe, because of my own limited practice, that there was any benefit in that. It just looked like, well, you're just doing something with your body. Isn't it supposed to be about the mind? So this is what happens with us as Americans. We have this, really good intellectual understanding, but we're approaching everything through the lens of the intellect. And then something hits you upside the head and you realize, the intellect is a wonderful servant, but it's a terrible master. So I looked at this. PBS had a documentary the other night on Tibet called "The Battle for Tibet," and it's heartbreaking. It's how the Chinese are taking Tibetan kids away from, especially the nomadic people, and into consolidating them into public schools. We drove by some of these when we were in Tibet, and they're teaching the kids in Chinese. So these Tibetan kids who don't know their own language and are alienated from their parents in different ways, and the sadness of it. And I saw, they had some wonderful shots of Tibet, and you'd see these some beautiful temples just off in the middle of nowhere. And so there's been reconstruction on those things because the Tibetans do that. But I thought, you can have a temple and you're not a freedom of speech to be in there. They got spies in with the monks, all these cameras, yeah, watching everything, all this. It's so sad. And then I thought, and it really moved me, about Akar Rinpoche and the love that he has for this place. And I see this as so humble. Why? Why does he do that? It isn't anything political. It isn't anything, hey, let's get these people pumped up and we'll have more money coming in. It's just not there at all. We're not even part of his organization. When Megan and Sultram, took their two little daughters to see him just at the winter teachings, and they talked with him, and you just feel the love that he has for us, people that he's met, people that he hasn't met, but certainly for White Lotus. And it's just stunning to me. It points to something deeper. It points to something that transcends all this drama we have going on. And yet the greatness of it is that we can harness this drama towards this purification. It's exactly what the Tantra is. It's a path of transformation. We've got all the stuff we need to transform. It's so unbelievably positive. And the good thing of it is that you can practice half-heartedly. And yet, like the Pure Landers say, the moment of death, it's just different. You have all the advantages of all that momentum that you've been building up that you didn't even see. And yet, there. And at the very least, because of thinking of this motivation just again and again and again and again and again, we're planting the seeds for a better lifetime, at the very least. So, yeah, pretty special. Pretty special. I wanted to read something too. We're on in the Tibetan tradition of mental development. The chapter we're on is chapter 4, which is death awareness. So again, this is really along the lines of the Nundro, the go before practices, the preliminary practices, but they're preliminary to the Tantra, which is already an advanced kind of practice. I mean, traditionally in India, they wouldn't even give an empowerment until someone had realized emptiness, because the Tantra is based on emptiness. You have to know that this deity is not something you can cling to. That this deity is not just a multiplication in power of your ego. You have to be thoroughly trained in the compassion and wisdom being the great emptiness. So the Tantra is special, to be sure, but nonetheless, this path of transformation where there's confidence, where there's faith, we do the best we can to understand, we do the best we can to practice, but it's very significant. So, there's some differences in how the Tibetans approach this too. The Geluks, for instance, the Gelugpa, the shining virtue, the tradition of the Dalai Lamas, um, you know, Lama Tarchan's Lama Govinda's teacher was a great Gelugpa Geshe, and he had the highest degrees from, I think it was Sarah University, first in the Sutra and then in the Tantra. And so he was a great teacher. But at one point, he walked away from it all, went off into the mountains, and started to practice. And eventually, even like people just roaming around the mountains bumped into him, and they were sort of moved by his heart, and he came out of the mountains and became a teacher. But the Gelugpa way is to study this completely, and then you're ready for practice in the sense of intense kind of meditation practice or retreat. But you have this solid conceptual and experiential, but conceptual especially, foundation. Why? Because the Tantra is dangerous, can be dangerous. People break Samaya with their teacher. They have some experience and they think they're enlightened and don't need the tradition anymore. Just all sorts of malarkey happens, can happen. So you have to have that solid foundation. And that's what this book is doing, this solid foundation. But this is the Gelugpa way, very safe before you practice the Tantra. But the practice of the Tantra with that kind of understanding can be really something. There was a story of, again, Lama Govinda's teacher. I think uh, he was teaching in Srinagar, I believe, at any rate, in Darjeeling, I think. I'm getting my places mixed up, but it was northern India, one of those little principalities. And he was in privacy in this temple that was a little bit raised up, so you couldn't see in the window from the ground. But there was some kind of mischievous kind of young guy who wanted to see what was going on, and he climbed up onto the platform where he wasn't supposed to be, and he looks in the window, and the Lama had transformed, into, it's a different Yamataka, but nonetheless, this wrathful figure. Um, uh, and the man who was kind of superstitious was terrified. So solid foundation, practice the Tantra, really, really safe, really, really good. But then you have like the Nyingma, especially, and the Kagyu, us, who jumps into the Tantra more quickly. And people say, yeah, but there's risks, there's dangers. And they say, yes, but life is very short. So there's a tremendous opportunity. But of course, we have to be humble in that and be striving to understand what we're doing so that we're doing it correctly and safely and doing it for the benefit of others. But when we liberate all, that includes us. So we come along without our attachment to ourselves. Process is natural. We don't have to make it happen. We just have to practice. But this idea of the need and the situation that we're in as sentient beings, I wanted to read something to you from The Light of Asia. So this is a poem. I mean, a wonderful poem. It's like, the Odyssey or something. It's not that long, but it's a long poem written by Sir Edwin Arnold, who was, if I'm not mistaken, the poet laureate of the United Kingdom of Britain in the late 1800s. And somehow he had come across, Buddhism, and then wrote this remarkable poem. Um, so what I wanted to share with you is his his recreation of the Buddha's Gautama's dissatisfaction. Here he is in this, I mean, like he'd won the lotto. He had this royal position. He had a future that was laid out for him. He had a beautiful, devoted wife who was totally talented and intelligent, and his son born, uh, thereby satisfying his obligation to produce an heir as a member of the royalty in the warrior class. So, and yet, in the midst of this, he's feeling dissatisfaction. Yeah, it says, this is the book, the third, in which the calm home of happy life and love lived our Lord Buddha, knowing not of woe, nor want, nor pain, nor plague, nor age, nor death, save as when sleepers roam dim seas in dreams, and land wearied on the shores of day, bringing strange merchandise from that black voyage. Thus oft times, when he lay with gentle head lulled on the dark breast of Yashodhara, her fond hands fanning slow his sleeping lids, he would start up and cry, "My world, oh, world, I hear, I know, I come." And she would ask, "What ails my lord?" with large eyes terror struck. For at such times the pity in his look was awful, and his visage was like a god's. Then he would smile again to stay her tears and bid the venas sound. Venas is like a guitar. But once they set a string gourd on the window sill, and there, where the wind could linger over its notes and play at will, wild music makes the wind on silver strings. And those who lay around heard only that, but Prince Siddhartha heard the devas play, and to his ears they sang such words as these: "We are the voices of the wandering wind, which moan for rest, and rest can never find. Lo, as the wind is, so is mortal life, a moan, a sigh, a sob, a storm, a strife. Wherefore and whence we are, ye cannot know, nor where life springs, nor whither life doth go. We are as you are, ghosts from the inane. What pleasures have we of our changeful pain? What pleasures hast thou of thy changeless bliss? Nay, if love lasted, there were joy in this. But life's way is the wind's way. All these things are but brief voices breathed on shifting strings. O Maya's son, because we roam the earth, moan we upon these strings. We make no mirth. So many woes we see in many lands, so many streaming eyes and wringing hands. Yet mock we while we wail, for could they know, this life they cling to is but empty show. 'Twere all as well to bid a cloud to stand, or hold a running river with the hand. But thou that art to save, thine hour is nigh. The sad world waiteth in its misery. The blind world stumbleth on its round of pain. Rise, Maya's child, wake, slumber not again. We are the voices of the wandering wind. Wander thou too, O Prince, thy rest to find. Leave love for love of lovers, for woe's sake. Quit state for sorrow, and deliverance make. So sigh we passing o'er the silver strings, to thee who knowest not yet of earthly things. So say we, mocking as we pass away, these lovely shadows wherewith thou dost play. So moving to me, this fundamental understanding of the impermanence. And of course, this is one of the four thoughts that turns the mind to Dharma. It's a precious human birth, and then impermanence, or as this book says, death awareness. When you have this awareness of death with you, and it's trained, so it's like those women in Asia, in Burma, walking with a bowl of rice or something on their head, this perfect posture, and they stop and they're talking to their friend, And yet they're always aware of that bowl on their head. It's just sort of, there naturally, not forced. So too our awareness of death. When that's there, then you can have the experience of being in the midst of something going wrong or something, but it's put in context. You have a better, more wisdom and understanding. I see so much in my work, things going wrong for people in their legal life, especially in family courts, and just the tremendous suffering and just, not thinking that things could go wrong or that they may have some role in what's going on with it. Instead, the problem's all out there. This rigid understanding and thinking that things should go on without dissolution forever. Whereas when we know it's all impermanent, it's really the start, of the training of the mind, getting it going in the direction, the understanding of interdependence, and then, of course, emptiness, and then the great freedom. Once we stop trying to make things solid, we can play whatever's happening. We're like involved. The life's better. So amazing to me that this belief of rebirth, this belief of a pure land, this belief of certainly realization, unlike our kind of Protestant ideas about it, it makes this life better. Some of the early Christian missionaries who went to, I think, Burma, the story's actually from Burma, they had this idea from reading some of the Pali Sutras and especially, First Noble Truth. They just thought everyone was going to be sour and just like, I don't know, like the Calvinists living in Geneva 200 years, 300 years ago. Oh boy, this is bad. Instead, the Burmese were all like Tibetans, all happy, living with their lives. Things going wrong, they could somehow accept it. And this wonderful life right here, right now. So this has more meaning the farther we go, because when we see that it's not dualistic, there's no, it's not some other place we're trying to get to, but rather it's all about realization. Really wonderful. But what a wonderful teaching to have. The Buddha said the teachings on emptiness are like, he used the example of on the seashore. You have like a little bird walking on the wet sand, and there's footprints, and the water comes in, and a certain amount of water fills that footprint, and then you have a deer come by, and the footprint's a little bit bigger, a little deeper, more water can be there. But then you have an elephant, this big flat-footed post kind of thing, and so much water fills up. The Buddha said, my teachings on impermanence, like the footprint of an elephant. They're just more weighty, there's more there. And so here we go, precious human birth, and then impermanence. And you see how that too is already training us in the right way, because we can sit around, and plenty have. I mean, the existentialists all thinking about death, and it's all this big kind of sour thing, like life is absurd. Isn't that the term that the existentialists used? Absurdity. But so what happens with the Nundro starts with precious human life. So there's something precious, there's something valuable there. It's not just some emptiness, some intellectual, everything's going to be impermanent, so nothing really matters, really no kind of essence, no anything. No, they start with the precious human life. So there's this completely positive. And this is the thing, the practice is not just, one way, a conceptual thing, sure, positive thought, negative thought, they both can just be thoughts clouding the mind, you might say. But there's a difference, because the positive thought, the virtuous thought, actually has quality and is the appearance, the manifestation of our true nature. Whereas the negative thought is completely adventitious, it's like the wind just blowing around. So it makes a difference. And then you think like when they talk about the 5 Buddha families in the Tantra practice, the mandala. So what Amitabha in the West, right? His wisdom is discriminating transcendent wisdom. So helpful. Because yes, transcendent wisdom and all the Western intellectuals going, I'm into transcendent wisdom and all of this. That's fine. But it's discriminating transcendent wisdom. It's like they want the wisdom, they think, but they don't want the compassion. They don't want the upaya, the skillful method. They don't want the teachings. And so they're limiting themselves, just clinging to their own kind of idea in that. Understand. Sometimes it's people who have sort of suffered the most, who are the most disappointed in life. You know, they've had something that just sort of knocked it all out of them. And again, like Edward Kanzi, that's a scary place to go. We spend our whole time not having to look at that, but it's actually a great advantage because you've had a purification, you might say, and a whole bunch of obstacles that you might have to go through. But again, you're going through with that understanding of their ultimate lack of power, their ultimate emptiness. And so that's a good thing for us. There was a woman I knew at the Rochester Zen Center, and it was very interesting because she actually came to a realization very easy, like the first kind of retreat that she did. But she had been, abused. And so sometimes life is so complicated. You can have someone who, their ego has been kind of destroyed. And in a way, it's a little bit easier to get less ego, less ego damage. But of course, she was kind of lacking in kind of the solid psychology that allows you to relate to others, to communicate to others, and to teach the Dharma, for instance, or to practice in that way. So there's no free lunch, is what I'm saying. And people who just, very badly want to have some sort of realization, I mean, that's good, but it's not the whole thing. There are all sorts of situations where people do have some sort of spontaneous, kind of profound insight, but then it goes to their head. And they go, oh my, I'm special now. It's like, that's a complete mistake. Just a complete mistake. It's like the teachings say, he who says does not know. He who knows does not say. And when you have, we're fortunate interaction, like with someone like Gar Rinpoche, completely ordinary, down to earth. I mean, the simple human emotions, the interactions. And yet when you put him in that situation where, it's his obligation to give teachings to other, I mean, it's like his Vajrakalaya book. I can't even get through it. It's so profound. Every paragraph is like amazing if you could only realize that. So you understand, that you get a glimpse, so to speak, of the depths of his realization, let alone the stories and all experiences that happen in the way that you can be benefited just by being there. So we're extremely fortunate because the mind of the Lama is limitless. And even in a humble place like ours, all the obstacles that we have in our lives, the really kind of limited opportunities for formal practice. Every moment can be practiced, but nonetheless, even in a place like this, as long as we're not breaking our samayas, as long as we're not putting up these kind of barriers and rejections of each other, and certainly with the Lama's wisdom mind flows through the place. And so for like new people coming here on a Sunday and they sit down, they don't realize they have a tsunami of blessings washing over them. And we don't have to say anything to them because that's happening. It's just cause and effect. We may never see them again, and that's okay. But that's something planted in there that can surface at a major moment. The body dissolves, and suddenly what's valid is there. And they have some way in this life of thinking about it or connecting to it in a very kind of, even on the surface way. There's something much deeper going on. And so when that happens, when the Lama's wisdom mind is flowing through the center, it means that we participate in that. To have brought people to Dharma, just to have a glimpse. There's a wonderful scene in it's 7 Years in Tibet, where again, Heinrich Harr, who wrote the book, he was like this kind of superstar. He was a skier and then a mountain climber. I think he was Austrian, but of course the Nazis took over Austria, and I think he won a medal of some sort skiing. I think at the 1936 Winter Olympics, which of course were held in Germany. So the Nazis made him into something of a national figure, just like we do with sports figures. I always get a kick out of it, when we have our political campaigns, and you either have some actress or some um, athlete telling you who you should vote for. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, really, what kind of expertise do they have? But of course, everyone plays that game. We like it. We feel good. But at any rate, they made Heinrich Harr into some sort of a star, and he had him. I don't know if he was the leader of it, but the Nazis had a campaign because they were conquering everything. Right? They were going to conquer K2, I think it was, which is like the second highest mountain in the world. So it's in the Himalayas, right? And so this team um, was in British colonial India. And from there, they were going into the Himalayas, into Tibet, to climb K2. And in the movie, and this is actually true, they were trying to climb K2, and there was all sorts of bad weather, snow, blizzards. You can't go. You can't go. It's not going to work. And Har, was this very egoistic. He was going to push on, push on, push on. But finally, whoever was the leader overruled him and said, "No, I can't go. We're going back." And I may have the timing in the movie wrong, but the scene is they're walking out of the mountains, and they come across a man who has a horse. Actually, I think coming out, and there's a man, a Tibetan, who has a horse, and to help them get further out. But as Heinrich has this interaction with them, the man has, like a Gao or something. He has a Dalai Lama, picture of the Dalai Lama. And, somehow that strikes Heinrich's eye. And then years later, they came out of the mountains. They were staying they came back into Britain. And in the meantime, Britain had gone to war with Germany. So now they were enemy in, enemy territory. And the British arrested them and put them in a prisoner of war camp. That prisoner of war camp later was given to Chetsang Rinpoche. So where Megan studied, where Sotram studied, where Kempo taught, that was once this British prisoner of war camp that eventually Har escaped from. And he was trying to get to Japan because Japan and Germany were allies. Figured if he could get to Japan, he could get to Germany. And Japan, of course, was roaming around China, conquering China. So they thought there was a chance. And they went over the Himalaya into Tibet, but they sort of got stuck in Tibet. But that moment of seeing that picture of the Dalai Lama, seems like just a random kind of thing. And yet there's something different. Something's planted in the mind with meaning. It's like your true nature it's just suddenly for a moment, the clouds, like for a moment, part, and you see the beautiful silver moon at night. I thought of this when we were having activities up here with Garchen Rinpoche on the old retreat land, And at one point, one of our members brought her old dog. She had a 13-year-old dog that was, pretty old. And she went up to Garmache with the dog, and Garmache took out this a little metal picture of Buddha Amitabha. It was it was like on a necklace or something, and he was moving it back and forth, reflecting the light of the sun, and therefore the image of Amitabha into the eye of the dog. You know, this is it's sort of beyond our ordinary kind of education. And yet, with just a modicum of faith, and that faith can just be, I don't see any alternatives, but a modicum of faith, this whole world opens up. And then we have all the teachings that are our guides and our ways for our honing our mind and questioning, is this right? Does this make sense? This whole process of our interaction with our own thinking mind, how wonderful. And underneath it all, this pure kind of need, which leads to self-liberation. And then, really purity that leads to Buddhahood. Okay, so I wanted to read that poem tonight, and we didn't even get to the book because I have such a big mouth. Sorry. Um, any questions or anything tonight? Otherwise, we'll do some dedication and you need the mic.
I was wondering if you could tell a little more detail about how Garshin got involved with the center.
Uh-huh.
Like the whole story. It's probably long, but
It's not too
just
long.
to, if you
Yeah.
could, because I don't really know. You said Chetsong Rinpoche is the one who asked you to start it, or
No, no. It was Ayin Rinpoche who asked us to
okay,
start it.
okay,
So way back when, how that happened, there was a man named Yogi Ananda. I don't know what his real name was, but he was some sort of a Western Hindu yogi practitioner, and he had a place in downstate New York. And he met Ayin Rinpoche, and he wanted to give land that he had in Dansville, New York, outside of Dansville. And so Ayin Rinpoche came here for that purpose. And uh, he had a Western nun who was with him. It was a very interesting person. She had been at TMC, but got into some sort of trouble down there. I know trouble, but just she was hard to get along with. Uh, and she was like his advanced team. So she came here and she knew one person in Rochester, Mackenzie Stewart, who was a local Tai Chi practitioner. And he had some sort of I think it was a Tai Chi center on South Clinton. And he also had a little shrine because he was a student of the Karmapa. He would go down to KTD. And so he had met her there, and he was the one person practicing, well, there were two people, but practicing Tibetan Buddhas in town. And I don't know why, but we happened to go to his place one morning. Oh, because Kenshin, Concho Gyaltsen, had been invited to town by Max Stewart. And there was no organization, no Dharma Center, anything like that. But we were friends with um, Fred and Erica Epsteiner, who had been sort of big mucky mucks at the Zen Center. The Zen Center were called three trustees, and they were the ones that really managed the place for the teacher. And Fred was, really a wonderful guy and very influential at the Zen Center. But then he and Erica decided to have a family, and that wouldn't work being on staff at the Zen Center. So they wanted to do a pilgrimage first. And they were going to go to India, then Korea, and then Japan. They were saying Japan for the last. But they got to India and they ran into the Tibetans, which was all new to them. And they met a Nyingma Lama named Zonar Rinpoche. And the next thing you knew, they had rented a little hut and they were doing Nundro. They never made it to Japan. And they came back here and they were a little bit controversial because the Zen Center could be a little sectarian, you know. And so they were in Rochester and they had a little meditation group that would meet on Friday nights. It was very informal. You'd come and just silent sitting for half an hour, and then people would have tea and cookies and that. And it sort of was a refuge for people who were having some sort of problem with the administration of the Zen Center. And Gretchen and I never had any problem with the Zen Center. But for some reason, we liked Freddie Epstein, who was a friend. And we thought that, you know, whatever kind of criticism people had, sectarian criticism was just kind of stupid. I mean, I just thought, guy's practicing Buddhism, how bad can he be? So we would go on Friday nights. And one Friday night, we had gone to this one empowerment, and then one Friday night, Max Stewart. So Max Stewart didn't come on Friday nights anyway, but so that was sort of a tip of our toe, not knowing what we were doing in a Chen raising empowerment. And then we were one Friday night, and here was this Western nun, and she was really a wild character. I mean, she had been a heroin addict and sort of went cold turkey and dropping it all. I mean, tremendous kind of will. Yeah. Yeah, she had some very positive qualities, but she was a real character too, because it was kind of like she still had some of the bad, bad personality going with it, like a dry drunk, you know. So she was here for Ayan Rinpoche, and so we knew that he was coming, like in 2 weeks, and Gretchen and I had been to India and been to some Tibetan places and were interested, but we didn't have any kind of conscious, you know, that's why we went to this empowerment, because things were kind of opening up in a way, looking back on it now, kind of opening up, but we didn't think nothing special was happening. But suddenly I started being overwhelmed with dreams and feelings. And sometimes I remember I just started weeping, thinking, and my thought was that the Mahayana was coming to Rochester. And of course, with that meaning entering into my life. And I was just overwhelmed emotionally. So at any rate, the Lama showed up and there was all this spontaneous interest. I think there was a big hunger in Rochester when we were. And we went down to Dansville and it saw the land, and this man gave him the land on the provision that he build something in it within a year, which never happened. But meanwhile, up came this Dharma Center, and then with just a few months, Chetsang Rinpoche came. There he is in Rochester, you know, head of the Drikung. Then Ayan Rinpoche came back in a year and gave a POA retreat, and that was kind of really sort of blasted the thing off. All right, so this is like 1986. Charlie? Yeah, it was Charlie's house. Charlie offered his house on Alexander Street. And I remember the first time we went there, you know, you got to remember, Gretchen was used to the Zen Center where everything was like the Ritz. I mean, they had money, they had big donors. They, you know, Philip Kapleau was an excellent businessman and manager of money and all this kind of stuff. And it was very, you know, Japanese and simple and clean, and, you know, big house, and it just, you know, beautiful and just aesthetically so pleasing, you know, just like, oh. And then we went to Charlie's house, which was painted like a muddy purple. And like Gretchen, it looked like the Addams family house. She didn't really want to go in the door, but she overcame appearances. That's good. Shows you she's got something deep going on. So that's like 1986, right? That's when it was founded. But then in 1997, Gar Rinpoche had gotten out of, and Ayan Rinpoche decided to sponsor Gar Rinpoche's first trip to the United States. And since we were it, we were in charge of his visit. And so that's how he came here. And we were so small and everything. I didn't want him to come. because we didn't have the ability to have a translator. We had never had a translator before. Having to pay a translator seemed overwhelming.
Didn't that also coincide with you guys visiting and being sold to buy? Is that a different?
Yeah, that was later. Yeah, that was later. We actually purchased the house on Goodman Street, but that was through Garam too. He was here for an event on the retreat land, and Kunga happened to find this house for sale, and so we. And since Garam was here, we said, well, let's have him inspect the house, you know. So I'm talking to the realtor and said, okay, we're going to come. We're going to have this llama, and of course he had come with Sultram was in that group, you know. Tashi Jamlin was driving around the country with the monks doing their music tour, sacred music tour. I mean, they sold out Nazareth twice, two of it. But so I asked the realtor, all right, yeah, we're just finishing this retreat. We just want to come by and look. And I want this guy Garamche. Okay, okay. So I get there early, standing in front of the house. Here's the realtor, and the van pulls up, and out comes Garamche, and he's like followed by 8, young monks like Sultram. And Rinpoche has his prayer wheel, of course, and the realtor's there, and he with a big smile, he just breezes past the realtor, the 8 monks following behind, and he goes up to the top of the house and starts saying Vajrasattva mantra and throwing rice everywhere. He's going through every house. He's purifying the house, and he's going down the next second Lord, throwing stuff, throwing stuff, and then zoom because they had to get somewhere. They were going to a plane or something.
House you hadn't even bought it.
Yeah, we hadn't bought it yet. I just wanted him to inspect the house, to say yes or no. And so he whisks out of the back into the van, the 8 monks right behind him, and they're going, hi, 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 in Tibetan to the realtor. And the realtor is like kind of like stunned. And he says to me, perhaps he'd like to see the garden. And I said, no, he's done. And then, unbeknownst to anything, out of the blue, we got $100,000 coming from outside of the country to buy the house. So this is a magical time, but this is the power, you get out of the way. Wonderful things can happen. Right. But anyway, that's how Garam Pache happened to come here. More stories, but I'll save them for another time. Okay. Thank you for asking. We dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every one, last one, be free. May we liberate ourselves through liberating them. And may we never forget our debt of gratitude to our mothers. Swaha.